Hello, everybody, and welcome to the YouTube debut of the Tarzan Bonanno podcast. I'm Tarzan Bonanno, and with me here is Ted Janiszewski from the Irenaeus Center in Rochester, New York. Welcome, Ted.
Hey, Tarzan. Thank you so much for your welcome. And let me just say at the outset, I'm a huge fan of this podcast. Amazing work.
Thank you. Not all me. We've got all these beautiful people creating these talks and lectures from the past and into the future. So
I've been listening through Father Taft's, is unbelievable teaching, and you've got a treasure trove. Let me also, at the outset, congratulations on your recent that sacrament you recently celebrated there.
Then my nuptials, my marriage, yes, thank you. Actually, fun fact for those who are listening, Ted was one of my groomsmen, and that's actually how this whole series came about. We were talking about what I've been doing since I moved out to Ohio, and then we were talking somehow about the great Jesuits, and Robert Taft came up. He realized that I've been working on a series of his lectures, so he had to go listen to them, and here we are.
Yeah, and in the course of discussing that, Tarzan, you said that forgive me for paraphrasing, but your purpose, like the reason why God put you on this earth, is to work for the unity of Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. And when you said that, I mean, like I my jaw dropped, and I said, Tarzan, that is what is beating through my veins. Like you just spoke directly to my heart.
Yeah, and I mean, being taught, I told you before we started recording that Jack himself was just kind of thrusted into this ministry to begin with. He started it, but his whole eparchy just kind of forced him into this role in a way, a role he's happy to do. And it's almost the same with me, and I'm sure with you in some regards. I don't think you started going to the Irenaeus Center to become the next quote unquote David Higbee at doing talks.
Not at all. It was I was very much oriented in a different direction. I was doing a technology degree at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I was a Protestant. But God had other plans, and what I was kind of headed for, was fine and well, but God had something better.
Yeah.
And so, it just kind of goes to show that when you start saying yes to God, you never know what adventures he's going to take you on.
I mean, he says we were placed in the spot for such a season as this. Sure, it's a line in Ruth, but Esther, but still. It holds true for all of Christendom. So, because just like you, I was also Protestant prior to entering into Catholicism. And then after 1 year, I get tossed in with you guys at the Irenaeus Center. And then after moving out, I get tossed in with him. So, I think it's beautiful that we both have this desire for unity. And obviously how you got into it is something I know, not really something they know. And I kind of want to hear it from your perspective, especially with this knowledge of we're not just talking Roman Catholicism, we're also talking the East.
Yeah. And so let me start before the beginning of my life, actually. Odd move, but I've been listening to your podcast episodes on Jack's Corner, and I was really kind of floored by some of the parallels I was seeing between his story and my story, because I actually am born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so what he was talking about, that life of Ukrainian Catholicism in Pittsburgh, in kind of those working class neighborhoods. I won't say that I experienced that from the inside because I was raised Protestant, but I remember, driving down the highway and just seeing the onion domes, walking down, the street, and, hearing these, I mean, like seeing this expression of the Christian faith, it's just not foreign to me. And as a matter of fact, my grandfather, my mother's father, my grandpa Manzuk, he actually was raised Russian Orthodox. And he was Ruthenian. So, my great grandfather was born and raised in the Carpathian Mountains. He and his brother went down to Serbia, which was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, got on a boat, came to America, and, started working in, a coal mine in West Virginia. Interestingly, my great-grandfather always wanted to go back to Serbia and go to seminary and become a priest. He was truly a devout man. And his brother did, in fact, do that. My great-grandfather did not. Actually, he got married and had 9 kids instead. But he, raised them Orthodox.
I mean, they're both holy. They're both holy.
Exactly, yeah. And I'll tell you just a story just to say what the world that, he entered into here in, as an Eastern European immigrant in America, what that was like. He came over, my great-grandfather, Manzuk, came over here, got a job as a coal miner, but he was not married. He came over, just himself and his brother. And he went to this Eastern European kind of this dance, here in the United States. I'll just say at the outset, this is the story that's been handed down to me. And if it's not true, then, come up with a better story. I dare you, right? The story, though, is that he saw my great-grandmother across the room at a dance. And my great-grandmother was actually Catholic. She was Slovakian. Her last name was Frank. And so, but my great-grandfather saw her, and he said to his best friend, he said, "Hey, see that girl over there?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "You should go over there and ask her to marry me." So his friend,
real quick. I thought you were
right.
I thought it was going to be even more the stereotypical, like, that's the girl I'm going to marry. Obviously, he did. I'm here living proof. But he's just like, no, you. Go get her my number. Go get her number for me, type thing.
So yeah, so he winds his way across the dance floor where he goes, and my great-grandmother had been working as a domestic, right? And so she was cooking and cleaning and washing dishes for some family in the area. And so when this fellow walked up to her and said, "Hey, do you see that gentleman across the dance floor? He wants to marry you." He took a look at him. And she said, "Well, been spending all this time working in somebody else's house. About time I ought to start working in mine. All right, I'll do it." And they had 9 kids together. Like they spent the rest of their lives like as a beautiful love story. But all 9 were raised. Yeah, my grandfather remembered the old church Slavonic. He remembered standing. They had no pews. And like it was a hard life, They but my great-grandfather was actually born in a World War I military surplus pump tent, because they lived in a house that belonged to the coal mine, and the coal miners went on strike. There was actually almost like a war in West Virginia. And the miners went on strike, and the mines kicked them all out into the fields. They just said, like, well, you're not paying your rent, then get the heck out of here. And so, thanks be to God, World War I had just happened, and they had, supplies so that they didn't just freeze to death. But that's, my great-grandfather, he went through that. And then there was the other story that I have from him was one day he was down in the mines and the mine collapsed on him. And I don't know if anybody else from his whole work detail survived, but he happened to be in. There's this V, right? That he was right underneath two beams, right? Two wooden beams, and just every like tons of rock just crashed down all around him, and he was in this tiny little triangle of air. And they dug their way, eventually through to him, and we're astonished to find him still alive. And
Grace of God.
They brought him, yeah, I know, bruised and covered in dust and soot. They brought him, safe and sound back to the surface. And so he, went home, hosed off, had something to eat, went to bed, and woke up the next day to go to work. Because there are 9 kids at home, and my grandfather always said, "Bravest man I ever knew."
Oh well, I nearly died. God saved me.
Yeah.
I still gotta work.
Right. And so for that generation, right, that came to this country, and everything in America is new, and the working conditions, oh my goodness, just atrocious, right? The faith was everything.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. So my grandfather was raised Russian Orthodox, but and was fascinated by it to the end of his life, right? But I mean, their upbringing, they were so poor, right, that he really did not receive good catechesis.
Yeah.
And so he went to World War II. He was an airplane mechanic in the European front, and when he came back to the United States, actually he got a master's degree in English, because my grandmother was getting a master's degree in English, and
He had to do something.
he saw her and he said, "I'm going to marry that girl." Right? This is a pattern, I guess, in my family, right? And so they got married. But interestingly, my grandmother, she was from a grand old American family. Her last name was King, and her parents didn't come to their wedding because she was marrying an immigrant. Right.
Oh.
They really thought that she was marrying below her station.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So this is this is all like the experience of, like the Orthodox, like the Eastern Europeans in this country. Like there was a lot of prejudice. And thanks be to God, like my grandfather and my grandmother were Christians. They forgave her parents. And actually, when my great grandparents on my grandma's side, when my great grandfather got sick, my grandparents, whose wedding they didn't go to, actually took them in and took care of them. So there was reconciliation, but boy, it was
rough there for a bit.
Like worlds collided, if you know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just kind of like an interesting part, like on one half of my family, that was it was a lot like what I heard from Jack, about his history, right? But here's the difference: because my grandfather didn't really receive catechesis. When it was after World War II, he married my grandmother, who was a Protestant. And, the Cold War was on. And so my grandfather said to my grandmother, he said, our children should be raised, with religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to, and yet I do not have, I don't have religion to give them, if you know what I mean, right? Like he had never really gotten it. He never really received the faith. He kind of went through the motions. He didn't really understand what he was doing. And so he said to my grandmother,
he couldn't teach
wherever you want to
kids.
take the family for church, right? That's where we'll go. And so they wound up Presbyterian.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming to this episode. I want to thank you so very much. If you enjoy this kind of content and want to support the creation of it, please consider going to Locals. The link is in the description. Thank you. Back to the show. At least he knew they needed God.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
That was just because he didn't have the best knowledge of where he came from. It's not, to use a word, he's not culpable. He's just give them to God. Whatever that looks like here, that's what we're going to do.
And that's, I think we've got to understand that so many people who fall away from either the Catholic faith or Orthodox or the Eastern Rite or what have you, who wind up in, a Presbyterian or a Methodist or First Bible Baptist or whatever, right?
It's because of poor catechesis in some way.
Right. And so some, I mean, there are churches here in Rochester, which, as you know, are like 80% ex-Catholic, right? And some people will look at that and say, like, dang those people, right? I look at it and I say, thanks be to God, these, low church Protestants were there to catch, these folks
from going all the way down.
Because so many Catholics here in Rochester just they left the Catholic Church and they became nothing.
Yeah.
Right. At least in these churches which are filled with ex-Catholics, at least they have a relationship with the Lord. At least they're reading His Word.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of Protestants here in Ohio, and one of them came up to me and was like, "Yeah, I'm getting baptized. I've made the decision." And I was like, "Weren't you raised Catholic?" "Yeah, I got baptized. I got baptized as an infant, but that doesn't really count. I don't really care for the Catholic Church." And I'm like, in my head, I'm just thinking, but if you care at all about the creed that says one baptism for the remission of sins. So
I remember, talking with a young man who was baptized Catholic, actually baptized by Father Ertl. That's a funny story.
Father Ertl, for those of you who are listening in, is the pseudo or actual chaplain of the Irenaeus Center, Irenaeus Ministry in Rochester.
Yeah, he's on the board, and he always claims to be 39 years old, like Jack Benny, right? But he's actually 93. So just a wonderful,
dyslexia with age.
Yeah, there you go. And anyway, this young man who was baptized by Father Ertl as a child was going to one of these Credo Baptist believers baptism churches and was planning on being rebaptized. And I still remember sitting at the table in the other room just talking him through, like, you really shouldn't, like, if you do that, you better be sure, you better be positive that your first baptism wasn't valid. Mm-hmm. Because if there's even the shadow of a doubt, you should put this off till because to be rebaptized is to say that your first baptism was nothing, right? And if it was something, then to be rebaptized is sacrilege. Mm-hmm. And so, he's now he's going to Steubenville. So he's returned to
that's what happens when you go to the Irenaeus Center in Rochester. That's just what happens. Yeah. You'll come back home, or you'll enter the Catholic faith. One of the two.
But like I know a number of, actually I know quite a few Catholics where they fell away for a time. They were raised kind of going through the motions in their Catholic church. They fell away, became really ardent, faith-filled biblical Protestants, and then were reintroduced to the riches of Catholic patrimony, and they became some of the best Catholics that I know. And I guess like the experience of the revert is in itself kind of an ecumenical journey, because everybody that I know that I've talked to, they understand their time, they're kind of like their exodus, right? They're from the Catholic Church, and then their return as having been part of God's plan for them, and their experience as Protestants as really having enriched them
to fall in love with Christ.
Exactly, and their reversion wasn't saying no to everything in their Protestant experience, but it was saying yes to a Catholic understanding. I mean, of which actually brings them closer to our Lord.
I mean, I can say this. I can say it for me, and I'm sure I can say it for you too. we take the things from what we learned as Protestants into the Catholic Church and
100%.
put it back in its proper perspective, proper category.
Yeah.
So your family went.
Oh yeah. So that's my that's my Manzuk side, right? So my mom's side. My dad's side, interestingly, was actually, the Janiszewski side was Polish Catholic up here in Buffalo. So my great grandfather on that side, it's interesting. He the name Janiszewski means so Jan is John, right? Janiszew means Johnstown.
Mm-hmm.
Janiszewski means from Johnstown, right?
Ted from Johnstown.
So I figure I figure we came from a Janiszew at some point. According to Google Maps, there are 3 Janiszews in Poland. So also in my my great grandfather's World War I draft card, or actually he misspelled his name. He just, I mean, like,
it happens.
Yeah, and that whole generation that came over with nothing, to make a new life. But he said that he was from Lublin, right? So I think he emigrated from Lublin, right? And so I imagine it's, the family eventually, way back is from the Janiszew that's closest to there. And he came to the United States, wound up in the huge, Polish Catholic community in Buffalo. And again, they had a very poor family. My grandfather grew up, Roman Catholic. His father was a delivery truck driver. My grandfather grew up speaking Polish. He was a fruit picker out in the orchards up here in upstate New York. He had a very hard, childhood. And when he was 17 years old, he joined the Marines. I think like in part, he joined the Marines so that he could, actually eat a full meal, for once, right?
Yes.
And, right after he joined the Marines, Pearl Harbor happened. And so he was sent to, the Pacific front and, island hopped all the way. I mean, he was at Guadalcanal. He was at the Battle of New Britain. He actually won a Silver Star there, which we didn't know until we were going through his, clearing out his house. And there was a newspaper clipping in the bottom of, in the bottom of one of his closets that he had won a Silver Star. Like, holy smokes! And he was a real hero. He was, he got malaria. It's interesting. He almost died in World War II, not from, being shot up, but because they gave him a treatment for malaria that he had an allergic reaction to. And so, but he rehabilitated in time to rejoin the Marines, and he was able to catch Peleliu, right? So again, unbelievable journey, and he was battlefield promoted up to I think some rank of lieutenant, just because everybody kept getting killed all around him, but God had a plan for my grandfather. After the war, he was recognized for his bravery. He told me he took the officer's test, and he said, "There's no way I passed that test," right? Because he had a high school education. He never went to college. He didn't know physics. He didn't know anything. He was completely self-taught. But somebody in the brass knew what he was capable of under fire, and said, this guy, you're going to make him an officer.
Mm.
And so he went career in the Marine Corps, made it up to lieutenant colonel. While he was, I believe he was teaching at, either at Annapolis or Quantico, he met my grandmother, who, again,
the
this
same
is the
story?
pattern, right? It's funny. In their case, she actually picked him.
See that guy? Go get his number
Right.
for me.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, he eventually proposed to her, and the story goes, he actually found out when they were getting married because he read about it in the newspaper. She actually wrote to the newspaper because she was worried he would change his mind. So she like put the date down.
You ain't leaving that easy.
Yeah. It's just a beautiful story. But, here again, he was raised in such penury that he really didn't. I mean, again, the Cold War was on, and when my dad and my uncle came along, my grandfather said to my grandmother, like, I want our children to be raised religious, right? I want them to have religion, but I really don't have religion to give them. Wherever you want to take the family to church, that's where we'll go. And they wound up Presbyterian.
Same Presbyterian church?
Right. Yeah. Well, they were in Monroeville in Pittsburgh, and the Manzukes were in Plum. Okay. So, they had different Presbyterian churches, but I mean, like, this is kind of like, this is where I came from. All right. Like, this is like the story kind of in miniature, right? Is like, there are, these rich, these beautiful, traditions, which came to this country, like the faith through through unbelievably difficult, hardship. They were able to hold this people together, and yet, just because of the circumstances, so many ended up falling away into into one of these Protestant denominations. And thanks be to God that they were there, because they were like the safety net that caught them from just going out into nothing.
Yeah.
So my father Janiszewski and my mother, Manzuk, right? They met at an Episcopalian church.
So they went from Presbyterian to Episcopalian, which is going higher church again,
right?
But still not back to their original roots. How did
right?
Did your parents
the reason
explain
is
this?
The Episcopalian church in Monroeville, St. Martin's, had the best youth group in Pittsburgh.
Fair enough.
It was just, and so they, it was a happening place, and so my parents went to this youth group, and I guess my dad was one of the most handsome fellows there, at least according to my mother, and she said, that one, right?
So all of the entirety of your family has the same story. It's person,
that one, right?
Done.
That's it. Yeah, and so
that was God speaking to your parents and their parents and their parents,
right? Yeah, and they I think really just out of the force of habit, they continued going to Episcopal churches. So I was raised Episcopalian, really because they met at an Episcopal church. We didn't go to St. Martin's going forward. We went. The church that I was raised at was actually St. Stephen's in Wilkinsburg, which is interesting because like my first pastor was Diane Stevens. She was and she was a very very kindly I have very fond memories of her. She was not the one who baptized me. It was actually the previous pastor who baptized me. But no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Diane Stevens. It was Diane Shepherd. That's right. That's right. Because her last name was Shepherd, which is just
just pastor,
right? And so like I was raised just thinking that St. Stephen's was what I would call broad church. The majority of the Diocese of Pittsburgh is what I would call low church.
Yeah.
So just for your listeners, the distinction, there are kind of like three different groups in the Episcopalian / Anglican churches. High church would be like Anglo-Catholic, right? Mm-hmm. So smells and bells and vestments and chant and beautiful liturgy, right? Most of, not all by any stretch, but most of the high church Anglicans split off from the Episcopal Church in the 1970s when they started ordaining women. The low church and the broad church stuck around. Now the The low church would be basically, for all intents and purposes, evangelical, with chasubles and electionary, right? And communion every week. So it's very, very evangelical, very biblical, which is why, very biblical. They were willing to go along with some were to a certain degree uncomfortable with women's ordination, but you can't just point at a verse and say, here's the verse that's against women's ordination, right?
Yeah.
It really is, I think you can make an absolutely airtight biblical argument for it, but you can't just prove text, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it was in the early 2000s when it was the what David, the founder of the ministry, always used to call the pelvic issues, right? When the first gay bishop in New Hampshire was appointed in the Episcopal Church. That was when it was at that point that low church Episcopalians said, because you can point to several verses to say that is not in accord with the mind of Scripture, right? And so the third group, okay, so there's high church, which is like Anglo-Catholic. There's low church, which is like Anglo-Evangelical, and then there's broad church, which is, I would say, it's also called like latitudinarian, really like going along with the world, I would say.
Go with the flow, man. Times are changing.
That's it. And so so for instance, broad church in the 19th century when the British Empire was very, yay, rah, go colonialism, right?
Yeah.
In the, as soon as the culture adopted, a different sexual ethic from its Christian roots, the broad church was, we gave full-throated support to the new sexual ethic, right? And so it was the broad church that was driving, they picked, they appointed a gay bishop in New Hampshire specifically to provoke those still remaining low church, Episcopalians that were still sticking around. So this was my experience in high school. I was raised at St. Stephen's up through middle school.
And you said that was broad church.
Yeah, it was pretty broad church.
You were raised in broad church. Got it.
And then from middle and high school, we moved out to the suburbs, up to Ben Avon Heights. And then we moved to, I would say, Epiphany was the name of the church. Moved to a low church. And so my really formative years were like low church Episcopalian, broadly evangelical. It's kind of funny. I was raised almost just like in an absent-minded kind of default way, believing in the rapture.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that Episcopalians didn't believe in the rapture, but at my youth group, they put on Left Behind, the movie, and I was like, oh, I guess that's just like the clear teaching of the Book of Revelation. That's just like how it's going to happen, and so I just assumed that's it,
Two things. One, on my journey into Catholicism, one of the first things I found out was that was false.
Yeah.
And when I told my now wife, who was just my girlfriend at the time, she's like, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense why it's not real. She recently told me that when I had said it, I was the only person she ever met that said that it wasn't right.
Right.
The other thing about it was, no matter how heretical the Left Behind books and that idea is, it is still my favorite Christian fiction sci-fi story. Just like, it is absolutely false, but I enjoy the movies to no end.
I have actually cradle Catholic friends who love the Left Behind series. I mean, like they put, my friend Ben Horvath loves to put it on, and just like, he and his family will watch it and, eat popcorn and roar with laughter. Just because, I mean, it's just like, it's, number one, ridiculous. Number two, it's fun. You know what I mean?
I have a heresy box, a box filled with every book that's ever been given to me that is heresy. I put them in that box, but I will still pick them out to read.
That's it. Yeah. And so yeah, that was my, my people, when they hear that I was raised Episcopalian, I think most people assume like, well, you were raised and you must have been raised, right, reading Cardinal Newman and Ronald Knox and these, high church Anglican. And so, that, when you became Catholic, it really was just, acceding to the Pope's claim to primacy. No, for me, I believed basically every Protestant thing, except I guess we were in favor of infant baptism. I myself was, baptized as a child, and the episcopacy, of course, right? Although, like, what you mean by that, that's really kind of the open question.
Well, that concludes this episode of Ecumenism with Ted. This episode and the next 3 to follow are about Ted's journey and how it led him to this type of work. Thank you so much for coming to this episode, and we cannot wait to bring more to you. Again, thank you, and God bless. Bye-bye for now.